Tonight on Politics Unplugged, a showdown at the Capitol over the state budget.
There's a lot of pressure, and there should be, on us being responsible and acting in a responsible way for the public.
Budget talks this week hit a snag when one Republican crossed party lines. Our one-on-one interview with the lawmaker who sank his party's $13 billion budget plan ahead.
Do you have any facts? Because you asked me that question now. You asked me that question. Don't look at Christine, you look at me.
Plus tense moments covering the election audit. Hear from the reporter involved in this confrontation with a lawmaker visiting the audit site. That's all ahead on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged, and our top story is the battle at the state capitol over the budget. Lawmakers have until July 1st to pass a state spending plan. The major holdup at this point is the proposed 2.5% flat tax for all Arizonans. Earlier this week, GOP State Representative David Cook broke with his own party and voted to kill the tax cut, at least for now. And in the process, Cook sank his party's $13 billion budget plan to pay for government services, from health care to education, as well as public safety and on the streets and in prisons. Representative David Cook joins me now to discuss the state budget. Welcome, Mr. Cook. I want to start with the fact that, again, reasons you voted against your own party to sink this budget. It was your vote, your decisive vote, that really sank the tax cut. You've raised a lot of concerns about the state maybe having to pay off debt first. Explain that.
Well, absolutely, Dennis, and I want to thank you for having me on the show. I would like for all the people in Arizona to please keep the people that have been affected and lost their homes and personal property in this fire and this tragedy and emergency that's going on. So with that being said, you led into me as being a Republican that broke ranks to sink the state's budget. I would word it differently. This Republican, a conservative that has a record on voting conservative and voting for tax cuts, did vote no on a package that I believe is not good for all of the residents in the state of Arizona, especially small cities and towns in rural Arizona. And also, it is not good for the taxpayer. In this budget, they are making decisions or trying to make decisions that benefit a certain financial class of people. And in my opinion, we are not paying off the debt. And no one wants to talk about the debt that the state owes.
All right, let's start a little bit with the flat tax, that proposed tax cut. Are you philosophically opposed to this? Is there any way that you would support this?
Well, yes, there are ways that I would support a flat tax if it was fair and even, and if there weren't financial gimmicks being used to support it with ongoing revenue, that no one has sat down and had a grown-up conversation with me on how the math works out. I think there are accounting gimmicks going on. We can just take one simple bill that was historic for the state of Arizona. We can take the Arizona gaming bill. Now, the Joint Legislative Budget Council scored that as about $32 million of new revenue for the state and the general fund. However, the proponents of this tax cut and this flat tax, they score it as $200 million of new revenue next year and $300 million the year after that. Now ask yourself, why do the professionals at the Joint Legislative Budget Council score it in the area of $32 million of new revenue? However, the proponents of this tax cut score it at those numbers. I don't think that'll ever happen. These are projections and not real dollars coming into the general fund and for the state and the services they need to fund.
Okay, and I just want to be very clear on this point. The flat tax, as it's proposed right now at 2.5%, scored at about $1.5 billion. Would you support that as is? Is there any way you would get on board with that?
No, Dennis, and I think you're asking a question you know the answer to. The leadership, and I apologize for that. The leadership, they knew I opposed it, and I have not had one meeting. They have in writing the questions and concerns I have about this budget that's being proposed. I'm the one that walked into this bill in the Appropriations Committee, which is, I don't know if it's ever been done in the history, but I walked up to the microphone so the entire state would know what my position was, and I said, I am not voting for that bill that is in front of you today. So they knew then that I was a no vote, but yet in this emergency, what's going on in my district, I was mandated by law and the Constitution to be at the state capitol. So, and I will quote the leadership's quote in the paper, we want to put on record these votes for a political purpose.
All right. Well, I'll hold you to that you will not support the tax cut as it's written right now. I want my producer, Maddie, I want her to mark the tape right there because, again, we will hold you to that. So let's move on now to the budget. What do you want to see in this budget that's not in there right now?
Well, I think there's several things that aren't in there right now. I do believe that this budget and all budgets contain policy, but really the budget should contain things that are funding programs and government, and that we are making, not my words, I'm using someone else's words. This is historic policy for the state of Arizona, the largest tax cut policy for the state of Arizona. If the historic and largest event, why is it being put into the budget? Now, that's a mechanism to get people on board by offering them things for their district, money-wise, that would get their vote to change policy. And what I look at is, are there things in the budget that I support? Absolutely. But I cannot give up those principles for the people of rural Arizona over getting something to vote for a bad policy for the entire state.
All right, and I kind of want to ask you a little about this. Clearly, you do have a record as being a conservative Republican when it comes to voting for taxes and whatnot. But recently, you voted to extend protections for DACA recipients, extend unemployment benefits. You know, you're killing your party's Republican tax reform. This all sounds like you're siding a little bit more now with Democrats. Do you agree? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm siding with Democrats. What I want to say are that some Democrats are coming to the table and listening to what I'm saying as a conservative. So let's start with the DACA bill. That bill did not give in-state tuition to DACA citizens. But as a conservative, we are investing in these children through their entire K through 12 education. We are paying for that. So at that point, when those kids have done everything right, and they want to go on to higher education in this state that they've grown up. So we have Sun Devil fans, we've got Lumberjack fans, we've got the University of Arizona Wildcat fans. They have grown up as Arizonans and attended high school here. I would like to keep those kids here, let them go on to higher education and climb that economic ladder as easy as possible. But what that bill did is not give them that right. We are giving the right to the people of the Arizona to vote on that issue, to give them their choice to voice their opinion. That's what that vote was.
So you're basically saying that Democrats are listening to you?
I would hope so, yes.
Okay. Last question, I guess, with this is, do you expect to see this budget done, completed, wrapped up before that July 1st deadline?
Yes, I do. And I have faith that we are going to come to the table at some point. We are going to work out and we are going to address the debt. So let me just say this, Dennis. If we had $700 to $800 million cash on hand one time, for whatever reason, would we want to spend that money one time to offset tax obligations for a higher income earning tax bracket? Or if we took that same money and applied it to the state's debt, which would save the taxpayers between $150 and $175 million a year, every year going forward, that is being a conservative. That's what I want to do. Save the taxpayers' money for not only 1 year, but every year going forward.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for this segment. Thank you very much, Representative David Cook. Thank you again for joining us here on Politics Unplugged.
Thank you, Dennis.
Is unclear. We know that there's Republican sources. Yes.
So you asked me an unclear question.
No, I'm not
so
done.
Is it clear who has
Sir.
to fund it? Is it clear who's funding it?
Sir, I'm not done. Can I finish my question?
Yes, ma'am.
And still ahead, heated moments at the audit. An out-of-town lawmaker got into a fight with a reporter this week. We're going to talk it out with the reporter about that confrontation right after the break. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. The Arizona election audit is nearly completed. More than 80% of the ballots have been counted. Now, that's according to the official audit Twitter page. So with the ballot counting set to wrap up soon, what happens next? And with me now is Jen FIFIELD, who's been covering this from the beginning for the Arizona Republic. Thank you very much for joining us here, Jen, to talk a little bit about this issue. So let's just start. We tape on Fridays. Where are we right now in the ballot count? When do we expect to wrap this up?
First, thank you so much for having me. It's my first time on your show, and I'm a big fan, so I appreciate you having me on. Right now, they're finishing up the hand count of all of Maricopa County's 2.1 million ballots. They have 2 ballots left. I just checked their live stream on Friday, and they are working on finishing those. Those have about 50 boxes. So they're going to be wrapping up maybe by Monday, Tuesday with the hand count. Next, we move on to the ballot inspection process. This is something they've already been doing, but they're ramping it up. This, as you know, they're inspecting every single ballot. And this is something that's not normally done in audits, but they're looking at things like, are there fold marks on the ballots? I'm working on a story right now to explain a little bit more about what they're actually doing after there's been so many conspiracy theories brought up in this process. Yeah, and you brought that up in a tweet I thought was pretty interesting last week, because this is highly technical. I know you and I actually sat in a briefing going through some of this stuff, and I got to tell you, it takes a little bit to really comprehend what's going on, because I know I'm not a tech savvy expert. But you made this point that that's how they speak when they're talking to reporters about what's going on, and maybe you're saying maybe hopes to confuse people that something really is happening here. I think part of what happens is there's the actual people running this audit, which are the contractors. The Senate hired contractors to do this. And then there's the people who speak to us. We're not able to speak to the contractors who know the ins and outs. So then what happens is the Senate's spokespeople come up to the press box. They try to give the best answers they can about what they know about what's going on. But because they're not in charge of the actual process, they're just telling us what we know. So sometimes the answers, they change by the day, or they're not clear enough, to actually be able to communicate that to our readers. Yeah. And can you catch us up to date a little bit for some of our viewers who may not be fully familiar with this part of the story? Now, there's a lot of data now that is supposedly being sent to a secure lab that's somewhere out of state. Can you explain that to us? Well, separate from the hand count and the inspection of the ballots, they're looking at our voting machines here, so that what you put your ballot in that actually reads the votes that you cast. They're looking at the inside of those machines, the software in those machines, and that data is perhaps what was sent to this Montana lab. They said it was a lab. When I looked into it, it's actually just the home of one of these contractors. It seems like he lives out in Montana, so he drove the data out with him. It isn't being monitored by the Senate, by any county officials, what he's doing there, which raises questions about whether he's secured that network and what data he has and what he's doing with it. And those are all still unanswered questions. All right, now I want to kind of move on, and some lawmakers from some other states have been taking notice of this audit. They've been visiting here in Arizona to check out what's been going on and what's been done. Now, this includes Georgia gubernatorial candidate Vernon Jones. And Jen, he kind of got a little bit confrontational with you. Let's show this clip right now.
You want this to be a fair process, completely understand. Like you said, you think reporters should be all about fair elections too. I mean, I absolutely am. If there's any fraud, I want to see that too, right? That would make a good headline, right?
Well, I would think so. I don't know if you've asked those questions and you've done internal investigations.
Absolutely.
And you agree that this should be, don't you agree that this should be happening?
I want to talk to you about...
I'll answer your question, but don't you agree that this should be happening?
I'm not going to give you any personal opinion, but I just wanted to talk to you about some of the things that we...
Well, do you have an angle?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about something.
And transparency. But do you want fairness and transparency?
Yes. Can I please ask you something?
Yeah, I just want to make sure you answer that.
So this is being fundraised by private entities. We don't know who is paying for this audit. They won't be clear about that. Many Republicans have announced they're fundraising for it, including OAN anchor Christina Bobb.
So you bring the media into it now?
No, so I'm trying to say.
But you did say OAN, right? So you're bringing the media into that.
No,
now,
I was
right?
trying to
so
give
I'm
you an
bring
example.
Oh, good job, trying to hold him accountable and ask him those questions. That is, that is life for reporters down there trying to cover this story. Good job staying up with him. And can you give us a sense of what it's been like for you to try to cover this down there? Because again, we're not getting a lot of access to people down there. You mentioned that earlier. It can get pretty confrontational, correct?
It can, and as you see, I wasn't able to actually get out my question. I was trying to say, if Republicans are fundraising for this, if Republicans are recruiting the workers, if this was happening on the other side with Democrats doing this, would you support it? And instead, he tried to break me down to where maybe it was a technique for him to not want to answer the question. But basically, I wasn't expecting that confrontation. These are visitors from out of state who are learning about our process. I was trying to get from him his opinion on things, why he was here, what he wanted to see. And instead, it became a situation that I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah, it was kind of a hectic day for you, because I believe it was like right after that interview, you got into another conversation with an employee for OAN who's been, out here standing in front of a camera, with a microphone, talking about what's going on in the audit. But she's also a fundraiser for this for this entire project. Maybe explain a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's OAN's Christina Bobb, a journalist, but now she's saying she's not a reporter. She's fundraising for this effort. She's trying to raise money on air, which, as you know, if I came on and I tried to raise money for something that I was covering, I believe I would be fired. That's not ethical in journalism, at least. So when he was asking me about her fundraising for the effort later in the interview, I walked up to her after and I said, "Hey, why didn't you say something? You are fundraising. You've been clear about that." Yeah. So I said, why didn't you say something is all I said to her. And she did come at me. And all I can say is, bullies, what we learned in middle school is they're the least secure people in the room. And, this is what we faced the entire time covering this is people attacking us just for doing our jobs.
All right, and we got about a minute left, and I do want to get into this aspect with you as well. What has been the result of some of these delegations from out of state that have been coming here to visit? How many states have sent delegations here to look at it, and what do you expect is going to be happening as a result of all of this?
The lawmakers who have spoken to us and answered our questions say they're here because they want to do this in their state. They want to take audits like this back home. I don't know if they want to do that for 2020 results in the future. The interest is spreading in this kind of audit. They're trying to prove election integrity, that they're all about that. While at the same time, people are questioning the integrity of this audit itself.
All right. Well, it's Jen Fifield with the Arizona Republic. Keep up the great work down there covering this big, important issue. And up next, I'm bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines. That's next on Politics Unplugged. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. It's time to talk it out with Marcus DELL'ARTINO and Tony Connie. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us here today. I want to start with you, Marcus, since you are the Republican. We've seen a lot of...
Nobody knows what that word means anymore, Dennis.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, we've seen a lot of a lot of action with the campaigns, a lot of announcements this week, and I do want to start with the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate. We saw General Mick McGuire jump in. We've also seen Attorney General Mark Brnovich jump in. What's your assessment with these two jumping into this race with Jim Layman's also in there?
My assessment is that this is going to be the slugfest of slugfests. More money will be spent in this race. This is the balance in the U.S. Senate. That's why this race is going to be so expensive in Arizona. You're going to see more money than we did last cycle for it here. And so, it'll be an expensive primary, but it will pale in comparison to the general election. And remember how much money Mark Kelly raised last time.
Yeah, and of course the winner of that primary will go on and face Mark Kelly likely in that general election. And Tony, I do have to ask you, is Mark Kelly, could he be flirting with some danger here when it comes to this issue of the filibuster? We know that Senator Kyrsten Sinema is getting a lot of pressure to go ahead and blow up and abolish that rule so they could get the president's agenda through. Right now, that filibuster is holding up that agenda. But Mark Kelly hasn't been really clear on where he is on that. Could that hurt him next year?
I think Mark Kelly is focused on getting things done for the people of Arizona. And if it becomes the fact that he has to get rid of the filibuster in order to do some of that, he's going to have to really think about it. In order to keep not just the base of the Democratic Party happy, but the majority of Arizona voters who support a lot of the legislation that's being blocked right now in Washington, D.C. by the filibuster.
And what is the fear? What is the apprehension for Kelly, as well as Sinema, for that matter, what's the holdup on abolishing this filibuster?
I mean, look, I don't want to, what they basically said is that they want to, create a scenario where Republicans and Democrats have to come together in order to come to some sort of a bipartisan resolution to get these things passed. But I mean, just look at what's going on right now in our state. The Republican, and like what we just heard, like, who knows what the Republican Party is, what they stand for. Right now they just stand for Trump. And we rejected Trump in Arizona not too long ago. And he's gotten more unpopular since. Just think that that's going to play out in this race in huge ways as this difficult primary gets settled on the Republican side.
And Marcus, I do want to ask you too. We've got Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who recently announced that she is running for governor, and then this week she announced that she raised $1 million this year. What's your take from that? I mean, that's a lot of money early in this cycle.
Well, two takeaways. One is I think, if I'm not, and I can stand to be corrected, but I think some of that money came in from her Secretary of State's race and was cash left over. But she did raise a significant amount of money. And remember, we've got this audit going on with national media everywhere. I think they've done a good job of playing into that and getting some sort of national dough rolling into Arizona as the Secretary of State and sort of has a hand in elections. She's the primary person that the media seems to be focusing on the Democratic side of the aisle to explain that. And I think she's capitalizing on it, just like everybody is capitalizing on this audit. Everybody's making money on this deal. And that really has to be a cause of concern for everybody.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you too, Marcus. I mean, everybody's expecting more people to jump into this already crowded Republican primary for governor. Who's left to jump in? Right now, we've got Kim Yee, we've got Karen Taylor Robeson, and we've got Carrie Lake in the race. I can hear a lot about Matt Salmon, former congressman, and I'm also hearing about the former Secretary of State candidate, Steve Gaynor, possibly jumping in.
I know, we talked about Matt last week, and I expect him to make his announcement shortly. He's going to jump in, there's no doubt. And I have heard rumblings about Steve Gaynor. I think he's still got some questions to sort of work out in his mind of what he wants to do and how he wants to go about doing it. But he is certainly another possibility of jumping in.
All right, and real quick, Tony, Greg Stanton, Congressman Greg Stanton, is he going to run for governor, jump into another race? He's going to stay put in Congress?
I don't know. I think he's a pretty popular politician in the state. I know that he likes what he's doing in Congress, and we'll see. I don't expect it, but I wouldn't be too surprised.
All right. That's all the time we have tonight. Be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged.